Take it away, sir.
Okay, well, I'm hoping to use some time today to let you guys, if you have any questions or need some clarity on anything we've talked about, hopefully we can process some of that and just kind of summarize, make this kind of summary. My PowerPoint today is basically on relapse and recovery. Now quitting, as they say in recovery, for me anyway, it was easy. I did it a bunch of times. But the real challenge with any addiction is once you quit or stabilize, how to maintain your abstinence, sobriety, and have a life without your best friend in it, without that whole that addict piece in your life. And that sounds easier than it is. In fact, a lot of people understand this. If you've got an addiction problem, problem gambling or drinking, and you stop, things get better. But if you're an addict and you stop your addiction, things get worse. Because you don't, there's a big hole and you don't know how to belong, in a non-addicted world, in a recovery world. And so, initially it'll get worse before it gets better. And that's when most relapses occur within the first 90 days after abstinence and sobriety, because that's the most stressful time. And that's when I don't know where to belong. I knew how to belong before, even though it wasn't what I wanted. At least I knew how to do that. So once I stop, I need to learn how to transition from practicing addict to recovering addict, and learn how to belong in a world where that's not a primary part of my life. And for some addicts, they've never known anymore. That's the only thing they've ever known. And so more help you have with that, the better. And the more resources you have to help with that, the better. And you just got to buy time. As they say in recovery sometimes, fake it till you make it. Do what you got to do. And take it a day at a time. And there are certain tools that can help you. And there's another thing they talk about if you're an addict and you have the urge. Think through the addictive behavior, think through the drink or the gambling or whatever it is. Get past that idealization of how good it'll make you feel, and look at what happens on the other side of it once you've done it. Then that can help you think, well, maybe I don't want to go there. And over time, that starts to get more ingrained. Our brain learns through repetition. And so the more we repeat it and reinforce that, more it becomes a part of how we think and act and kind of just what we do. And so from that perspective, there are some tools and resources. And people that are doing it can be a good resource too. People you can talk to and get support from are vital, I think. And one of the things they say in recovery is, without help, it is too much for us. Then the rest of that is, but there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. And so God's a good resource in this whole process too. And to use him to say, help me do what I need to do and guide me and be open to it. My experience is it'll happen. Might not be on your terms, but it'd be on his terms. And that's what's important, because he really does know what he's doing. And so that's very helpful. That whole idea of having that spirituality, having something greater than me that I can turn to when I need it, to give me support to get through the hard times. And I think if you don't have that, that's important to develop. And it can be whatever you need for it to be. It can be what pastor preaches on Sunday, and that's good. But for some people that don't work. And spirituality, like addiction and most intangibles, are a very personal and individual thing. So I need to trust what's going to work for me. In my own experience coming out of the Southern Baptist with a God's going to get you mentality, that whole religious piece didn't work for me. So I had to kind of put that on the back burner and and let God bring me around to it a different way. And that worked a lot better for me. And I found that help in 12-step programs, which it's God as we understood him. So that allowed me to define God in a way that was going to work for me. And initially it was, I'm this way and those damn Baptists are that way, and never the twain shall meet. But over time, now I would say it's kind of a hybrid of both. It's kind of come together as all the above. But I couldn't have started there. But you start wherever you are, and you build on it and figure out what's going to work for you, and the rest of it will come over time. And it's kind of amazing to watch, and it does work, or at least it has for me. So anyway, we're just going to talk about relapse and what it is, some definitions, some things that can trigger it, and then recovery and what that is, and some things about that might be helpful to you. Okay, this is a definition of relapse. It's the reoccurrence of a symptom or behavior or condition that has been absent or in remission. And this is true of any chronic disease. I mentioned before that I'm epileptic, and I have had seizures for a couple years. But if I had a seizure today or tomorrow, I would be relapsing back into my epilepsy. And then I would have to go to my neurologist and say, all right, do we need to do something different? And if you've been diabetic, you had your blood sugar under control, and all of a sudden it spikes up on you. That's a relapse. And then you have to stop and look and think, did I miss something? Is my diet slipping or something? And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. Au contraire. When you have a relapse, to me, what it says is maybe I missed something that I need to see in order to stay where I need to be. And if you use it that way, then it becomes an opportunity. In fact, somebody told me once, it's important to take a relapse and turn it into a recycle. If you do it that way, I think it can be a resource, and that's important to do. And the more you understand what it is and yourself, the more likely you are to be able to pick up on some of that. And you can ask the people around you that you trust who are honest with you and say, hey, am I missing something? Can you help me here? Sometimes you need other people to be your eyes for you, especially when it comes to addiction. Because, the main thing is we're not going to see it. So sometimes other people can, but you have to be able to hear it and then look at it and do what you need to do. Characteristics. It's a separate process with identifiable symptoms. This is the thing about the relapse dynamic doesn't kick in until you get sober or get in recovery. In fact, with alcoholism, there's about 41 sobriety-based symptoms of the disease that don't kick in until you stop drinking. So it's helpful to understand that. So this addiction can get you on either side. Well, things like anxiety and loss and grief and stress and things that you wouldn't see normally, preoccupation, things of that nature, cravings, things like that, can all. And if you're dealing with complicated grief like we talked about, the cravings trigger the reward circuits in the brain just like the addiction did. So it makes it, you can get addicted to that, and it can really pull you back into that euphoria that can pull you into relapse too. So understanding that and being able to get past it and do the kind of work we talked about in terms of grieving can be real helpful. It's sobriety based. Somebody told me once, and it's almost profound, so simple it's profound. They said, you always get drunk from being sober. You never get drunk from drinking, you just keep drinking, And in sobriety, you have to make sober look better than drinking to stay sober. Because when drinking looks better than sober, you're going to drink. And so that's the challenge. And initially, most addicts don't know how to do that. And that's true of drugs or gambling or sex or whatever the addiction is. I got to make not doing it look better than doing it. When you get into this dynamic, and it doesn't happen all at once, it's a process, it leads the addict to a point where they only see three options. The first one is to drink or act out or use. Second one is to go crazy. Third one is to kill yourself. And when you get to that point, you don't have a lot of good choices. But at that point, going back into the addiction makes the most sense. You see what I'm saying? So it's really important to identify it and disrupt it before you get to that point. And you see that, particularly, gamblers have one of the highest rates of suicide of any mental health illness. And I think it's because it's more insidious than a substance addiction, or it's more intangible. And I think, the relapse process get them to that point, and that's the only thing they know how to do. Plus, recovery can be very painful initially, because it's kind of like when the Novocaine wears off when you leave the dentist office. And you say, what in the heck was he doing in there, right? I mean, when he's got you numbed up, he could go in there and jackhammer, it wouldn't bother you. Relapse correlates to life stress. There's a correlation between stress and relapse. The higher the stress, the higher the likelihood for relapse. And we've talked about all these things. And some of the issues that can contribute to stress and recovery have been there all along, but as long as you were in your addiction, they were there, but they didn't bother you. And once you stop distracting or medicating it, it's right there in your face. And it can be, the codependency or relationship stress, not knowing how to have meaningful relationships. Grief loss stress, we've talked about that. That's very painful, particularly if it's complicated grief, and generally it is. Shame-based identity issues and stress. And most of that goes back to family of origin stuff. That's where we learn to be ashamed, generally. 2 times in your life, when you're most vulnerable for shame is when you're little and when you're an adolescent. But when you think about it, that's the 2 times in your life when out here's the most important to you. You let out here determine whether you're okay or not. The last one is failing to change the environment and attitudes that supported the addictive behavior. I always say if you can't swim, and once you get out of the pool, you don't want to hang around the swim team. See what I'm saying? It's important to find other recovering people, or you can get pulled back into it. And with alcohol, like they say, it's not just the drinking, it's the thinking. And that's true of other addictions too. Our attitudes can really sabotage us. So understanding some of those, and the way you deal with them is identify them and start talking about them and get honest about them. And here again, it runs concurrently. Higher stress means higher relapse potential. But, or here again, and if you don't have the ability to manage the stress, then that increases the risk for relapse. On the other hand, if you have the ability to manage the stress, then the potential for relapse stays down or doesn't change. So it's not the stress, it's knowing how to deal with it. And that's kind of true for all of us. And knowing what the stress is about goes a long way in helping me know how to deal with it. So that's important. This is another chart that says the same thing. Shows you some of the stressors. And it just builds up over time. And having resources and people to help you see it's important, or you won't really notice it until you're ready to jump off a cliff or you're down to bar. By the time you're at a casino or down to bar with a drink in your hand, you've missed it. Or you're thinking about loading up a pistol and blowing your brains out. By the time you get to that point, you've missed it. And here's recovery. Recovery defined. Okay. It's defined as a voluntarily maintained lifestyle. Notice the key term there is voluntarily. It's something I'm doing because I want to do it. And a lot of times, I've got the court and other people tell me I have to do it. And if you don't ever get past that, you're still going to be in trouble. Ultimately, it needs to come from here, something I'm doing for me because I care enough about it. I think it can be. And the research shows that people going to treatment, whether they go voluntarily or involuntarily, the success rate's the same for both. And to me, it's like taking the medicine. It doesn't matter how I get it in me. Getting it in me can help me get well. But I think it's a double-edged sword. If I don't use the opportunities that the court mandates to help me get it from here to here, then I'm still setting up for sabotaging myself. And it's better than just warehousing you in a correctional facility or punishing you, because that's going to make it worse. But there's no guarantee. You just got to know, well, it's give me a chance to do something to help me, and I need to take advantage of it and make the most of it and be willing to utilize it that way. And some people can, and some people just can't. Some people just do what I call do their time, placate the court. And that comes back to really believing that I have a problem. Because if I think it's just bad luck, and that cop's out to get me or whatever, so if I can just get through this, I'll be okay now. That's a setup, you see what I'm saying? And it's hard to tell who's that way or not. If I line 10 people up, I know that probably 2 out of 10 is not going to be able to utilize it. But I can't tell you which 2 they are, because they all look the same, But that's where you come in, to understand what you're dealing with and make taking care of yourself more important than whatever your addiction is, and reprioritize and substitute people for the addiction, and dreams and things are important to you. What I've seen, the people that do well in recovery are the people who get sober and then make other things in their life, careers and family and friends and what they've always wanted for themselves, more important than drugs or the alcohol or whatever. Well, that lowers it. Here again, that's hanging around the swim team if you can't swim. You see what I'm saying? And I think a lot of that's initially because, I don't know how to belong with non-addicts. I know back in the day, I didn't want no part of normal drinkers. They made drinkers look bad. I still believe that. I mean, you walk in a restaurant and see somebody come in and sit down and have 2 drinks and leave. What's the point? That's a waste of time. And I still understand that, and I'm not interested in doing that. And I understand some people can, and that's okay. But it never made any sense to me. I started with two bottles of wine, and then I'd do some serious drinking from there. Now that ain't normal, but I didn't understand it. But that's still in me. But I have it. It doesn't have me now, and that's the difference. What I've learned is I don't drink because I can't. I don't drink because I don't. And I remember when I first got sober, I'm the kind of guy, tell me I can't do something, hide and watch. So early on, I remember thinking to myself, you can do it, but your life works a lot better if you don't do it. And so as long as it's that way, I'm not going to do it. And that was 41 years ago. And it still doesn't look any better now. And so when I think about it, that's something I can't do. It's just something I don't do. When I was driving up here today, I didn't drive 120 miles an hour either. Or I don't play Russian roulette on a regular basis either. Or sleep on Claremont Avenue. I could do those things. There are just certain things you don't do. And when you put it in that category, then it's not something you have to fight or make a big deal. It's not something you use to identify yourself with. It's just part of something that becomes kind of a non-issue. And so the people that make it, I think, end up doing that. And that's a process too. And over time, as your life gets better, then it doesn't make sense to screw it up. You can, it just doesn't make sense to do so. The more you have to lose, the less likely you are to trash it. But it's always potential. And so I don't take it for granted. I just keep it in perspective. That's the way I look at it. Okay, here again, it's a voluntarily maintained lifestyle. It's characterized by sobriety. I can't recover until I stop doing what's messing me up. You know, if I'm dealing with the fire, first thing I got to do is stop pouring gas on it. And once I stop pouring gas on it, I still got the fire to deal with, you know, but that makes it a lot more manageable. So I think that's got to be the first piece. That's not going to fix everything. It just gives me the opportunity to do the work to start to get well. Sobriety and recovery are two different things. I was told early on not to confuse sobriety and serenity, and I've found that helpful. That serenity is a sense of peace around who I am and belonging in the world, and having things that are important to me that I can be a part of. And if I just stop using or drinking or acting out and I don't have that, I'm just doing time. The old term is dry drunk, and you're better off drinking than being there. That's an awful place to be. Characterized by sobriety, personal health from a healthy life choices. That means I start to take care of myself, because I did a lot of damage to myself when I was drinking. I shouldn't even be here. You know, I survived a fatal accident. Most people I know did a lot of physical, emotional, and spiritual damage to themselves. So an important part of my recovery has been, you know, take care of my body, doing exercise and diet and paying attention to what I put in my body to make it healthier, and relationships, and a good spiritual life, and a good relationship with God, and those kind of things are all part of recovery. And I can't do those things unless I'm sober. But the more I do them, the more it reinforces, hey, this sobriety stuff ain't so shabby, you see. And the next one is citizenship. I gotta be true to myself and responsible in the world, and do things that reflect my values, morals, and help people, and not do things that are illegal or break the law. And here again, a healthy spiritual life. Well, Bill W., who was one of the founders of AA, said that recovery and sobriety is impossible without what he called a vital spiritual awakening. And I've often thought that's a good way of putting it. And a vital spiritual awakening, I think, is a realization that I'm part of God's best work. And maybe it's time to start respecting that in God and acting like it, and develop that inner life we've talked about. The true self that talks about in Richard Rohr's work. I've used that term for years. And that's the opposite, usually, of my addict self. And the more I reinforce that, you know, I heard a great definition of sobriety once. It had nothing to do with drinking. It's just that sobriety is making adjustments in the way that we do business with the world. And in sobriety, first, abstinence from all addictive substance and our behaviors. Because, you know, that's I can't accomplish these other pieces unless I'm clean and sober. That's been my experience, you know. That's the primary piece, but that's the first step, and it's kind of a paradox. But that's the easiest part. But, you know, then the rest of it is what gives me, I have to do to maintain that. I think it is an all or nothing kind of thing. I think sometimes you can do that for a while, but your goal ought to be complete abstinence. Because just to say, I'm going to stop drinking, but I can smoke a little pot or something else over here, I call that changing seats on the Titanic. and I need to get off the boat and stay off the boat. Because what it does, it's not so much the drug, it reinforces that mentality of the thinking. And that's what can come back and sabotage you in the long term. And I think, some people aren't able to do that all at once, but that should be a goal, I think. And start with what you can do and build on it. No question about it. I think we ought to, I'm going to get way out here. We should have revoked the war on drugs years ago. And I think we ought to legalize marijuana and all the drugs, heroin, cocaine, because like we talked about, in a culture where you call something a disease and treat it like a crime, then you perpetuate the addiction, you make it worse. And so in places, where they've set up use houses for heroin, where they decriminalized it, and you can register and come down and get pharmaceutical grade heroin and clean needles and get you fixed. They pretty much eliminated overdoses. And the people are able to come in and get their drugs and function. Because it's not so much the drug that's a problem, it's what we have, how we've set it up in this country, what you have to do to get it. Which you have to buy it from dealers in the alley, and you don't know. It's cut with everything from fertilizer to arsenic, and there's no control on potency or anything, and that's the basis for a lot of our overdoses. And the other thing it does, remember when I talked about that idea of the positive and the negative? It reinforces the negative in here, and that's probably the worst thing that can happen, because now I'm being treated like a criminal. If they did that with me as an epileptic, if they said, well, they used to do that way back when they didn't understand it. They used to think people that had seizures were possessed with demons. And they built sanatoriums way back out of the way, and they basically put them in there, or incarcerated them, and made them feel ashamed and guilty. And when they did that, nobody wanted to admit they had that problem, and it made it worse. It perpetuated it, because then you didn't want to do what you had to do to deal with it, because then people would know that you were a bad person. And I think that's probably the biggest, more significant terms of what we need to do culturally to deal with this. So the legalization of marijuana, I'm hoping, will lead to even more of that. And I think long term, that's going to help our process. Vancouver, British Columbia has done that. They've set up use houses. And if you want to check it out, Google it. And they pretty much eliminated overdoses, and it's been a real good thing for them. Some other countries have done that and found it helpful. But our problem is, the politics. There's a lot of special interests that have a lot to lose by decriminalizing drugs and addicts. First of all, some police departments, 80% of their funds come from DEA. To deal with drugs. So if we legalize them, they're going to lose a big chunk of money that they're used to support their police department. The private prisons that you have to pay to go to, the people we pay to send people to, got a lot to do if we lower incarceration level. The police union's against it, Big Pharma's against it, because now they're competing with their other drug. If, for example, heroin had been legal and we'd been using that, then maybe the oxy wouldn't have been such a bad problem. Because they're basically the same thing, they're both opiates. It's just that with the controlled substance, the problem with oxy, and I saw this 30 years ago, we used to call it hyperactive prescription pad. The doctors would just hand it out. Some of that's our own problem with the pill mentality. I'm going up on a soapbox here, so bear with me, all right? But it hurts a lot of people, and they would hand it out, but eventually when you start abusing it, you get to where they won't give you any more scripts. And now I can't get it, but I gotta have it. And that's when you start going out, finding other places. There's a underground market for it. That's when you start turning to heroin and buying it from the dealers on the streets. So I think, that's something that if all that was legal and we could monitor it and help people understand it, and not just, well, like the youth houses in Vancouver, not only do they register the heroin addicts and make sure they have pharmaceutical grade heroin and clean needles, they provide them with information and support and counseling to help them start to recover and get well. See, because once you get it out in the open, then you can do things to start to deal with it. And that was one of the big issues at the methadone clinic in Eau Claire, was helping identify. Of course, those people came in with a lot of problems. They had, it wasn't just an opiate addiction. Most of them were alcoholics and other things. So there was a whole broad range, and so I think it would have been worse though if they didn't have it in the open. But still, like alcohol, ending prohibition made the problem better, but it's still a big problem. It's just how you're going to deal with it in a way that's not going to make it worse. And nobody really understands addiction. You're always going to have that 10% that causes 90% of your problems. Well, in AA they talk about there are sons of fortunates. There's a certain number of people just can't get well, and that's kind of too bad. But they're out there, and they're going to do what they got to do, and the hell with you and me and everybody else. And my own bias is maybe you let them do what they got to do. At some point, you have to just let them do what they got to do. I think, fortunately, that's a minority, but at the same time, maybe that's okay. And at some point, maybe you say, all right, when you're ready to get serious about this, there's a resource to help you. In the meantime, you're going to have to do what you got to do. And that's as fair as it gets. As an epileptic, I'm not supposed to drive if I have seizures, but I could do it. I wouldn't, but I could. And, and that's here again, with OWIs, I worked with that forever. Taking an addict's driver's license, do you think that's going to keep them from driving? No way. But there are ways of dealing with it. Okay, well, I'm also aware that for a lot of addicts, particularly what I call spikers, people that shoot up, a lot of the rush is in the shooting up itself. In fact, they've done research with cocaine addicts, and when they look at the brain scans, when they start to cook up the cocaine before they ever inject it, the brains lighten up the same as it would if they were shooting up. And that's a different piece that I think we need to look at. And those are the excitement junkies, and those are guys that jump out of a perfectly good airplane, and skydivers, and people that get a rush out of excitement. Gamblers are like that. For the gambler, the most significant, it's not about the money at all. For them, it's about the excitement and the risk, and that kind of thing.